If we're going to talk about hitmen, we have to talk about Murder Incorporated. Murder Inc., as the press called it, is an infamous organization which worked as an enforcement contractor for every crime family of New York and elsewhere in the 1930s and 40s. It is believed that the group is responsible for almost 1,000 contract killings. Before we start, I would like to apologize in advance for the names that I butcher, because Italian American and Sicilian names are fairly prevalent in this list, and I am not the best at Italian pronunciations. I am bound to get a few of these hilariously wrong, so please bear with me. Number 8. Joseph Meldish. This guy was an enforcer for the Purple Gang in the Bronx, and was known to be pretty brutal. The police believe he's responsible for more than 70 contract killings and many more legal violations. The gang was known for killing and dismembering rivals as it controlled the heroin trade in Harlem and the Bronx in the 1970s and 80s. Its members, many of whom were relatives of more established crime figures, freelanced as muscle for the Lucchese, Genovese, and Bonanno families, doing wet work for them on numerous occasions, spanning several decades. Taking its name from a group of thugs that terrorized Detroit during Prohibition, the Purple Gang grew so powerful in the late 1970s that the authorities feared it actually might attempt to become the area's 6th organized crime family, potentially igniting an all-out mob war. A 1976 federal report cited the gang's, quote, enormous capacity for violence and lack of respect for other members of organized crime. The crew's power began waning in the late 1980s as members were snared in drug busts, and Joseph was finally convicted for one of his murders, in which he walked into a bar and riddled his victim, Joseph Brown, with bullets before walking out again. And even though he did this right in front of the man's wife, he was so feared that it took 14 years before anybody stepped forward about the brutal killing. 2 jurors were excused after saying they knew about Meldish and were afraid. The forewoman also asked to be excused after realizing the verdict would be read in open court. Number 7. Abe Kid Twist Reles. This brutal hitman was widely considered the most feared member of Murder Incorporated. When the fecal matter hit the fan in 1940 and he turned state's witness, he confessed to 85 murders in Brooklyn alone. His weapon of choice? An ice pick, which he would slam through his victim's ear right into the brain. Reles became extremely adept at using the ice pick, which lended to the particularly cold-blooded and psychopathic persona he was known for. He attacked a worker at a car wash in broad daylight for not cleaning a smudge off his fender. He killed a parking lot attendant on the spot for not getting his car fast enough. On another occasion, he brought a guest to his mother-in-law's home for supper, where, after his mother-in-law retired, Kid Twist, another gang member, murdered the guest and removed the body while his mother-in-law was still in the house. There's many theories behind his nickname. Some think it was the name of his favorite candy. Others think it's attributed to the way he strangled his victims. Either way, in 1940 he flipped, turned state's witness, and let the feds know about Murder Incorporated. Right after this, he accidentally fell out of a window at the Half Moon Hotel, which led to him being known as, quote, the canary who could sing, but couldn't fly. Number 6. Giuseppe Greco. A number of sources refer to him as Pino Greco, as Pino short for Giuseppe. He was a high-ranking member of the Sicilian Mafia and is considered to be one of the most prolific killers in criminal history. It is believed he has committed as many as 300 murders. His favorite weapon was an AK-47, one of which he used to slaughter over 58 people, for which he was eventually convicted in the early 80s. He rarely worked alone, instead choosing to run an infamous death squad. He also ran the so-called Room of Death, a pulp-and-row shack in a wasteland where victims were tortured and murdered before being thrown into vats of acid or dismembered and then dumped in the Mediterranean. In fact, dissolving bodies in acid was a particular favorite of his. After he vowed to avenge his dead father, he murdered Inzarilo's 15-year-old son by chopping off both his arms, shooting him in the head, and then dropping his corpse in acid. In September 1985, Greco was murdered in his home, shot to death by his 2 fellow mafiosi and supposed friends, Vincenzo Pisio and Giuseppe Lucchese, although the orders came from Rina, who had felt Greco was getting too ambitious and independent. However, both his murderers were arrested and one of them died in prison. Number 5. Harry Strauss, or as he was more commonly known, Pittsburgh Phil or Pep. This one's another employee of Murder Inc., and nobody is sure how many people he's actually killed. Some estimates are as low as 100, others as high as 500. He didn't have any particularly favorite method, just as long as it was brutal, including shooting, stabbings with ice picks, drowning, strangulation, and yes, live burial. He never carried a weapon, just in case the police decided to check up on him, instead using whatever he had handy at the scene of the crime. In the 1930s, he was committing assaults, larcenies, and drug dealing. He was arrested 18 times, but was never convicted, until, thanks to Kid Twist, he was arrested and convicted on 6 counts of murder. Strauss tried to avoid conviction by feigning insanity in the courtroom and on death row, but it didn't work. He was executed via electrocution in the infamous chair known as Old Sparky on June 12, 1941. 4. Giovanni Brusca. Now we're getting to the scary guys. Giovanni Brusca isn't so much number 4 on our list due to body count, not that it isn't high, but because he was a complete lunatic. Once in 1992, he stated that he easily committed between 1 and 200 murders but wasn't sure the exact number. He was active for another 4 years after that statement, killing who knows how many. He was known by several Italian names, which I won't try to pronounce, but they translate to the pig, the swine, and people slayer. An infamous example of his ruthlessness is when Santo Di Matteo took part in the 1992 Falcone killing, and following his arrest named names. After this, Giovanni kidnapped the man's 11-year-old son and tortured him for 26 months. He sent grisly pictures to the boy's father in order to get him to retract his testimony, but when it didn't work, he strangled the boy and dissolved his body in acid. There's not much more to say about this one. He was an insane, awful creature. Number 3. Benjamin Siegel, or as you may know him, Bugsy Siegel. Bugsy was a Jewish-American mobster known as one of the most infamous and feared gangsters of his day, possibly of all time. Described as handsome and charismatic, he became one of the first front-page celebrity gangsters. He was also one of the original founders of Murder Incorporated and a boyhood friend of Al Capone. When there was a warrant out for Capone's arrest, on a murder charge, Siegel allowed him to hide out with an aunt. Siegel was involved in the drug trade by age 21. His blue eyes, charisma, and charm went a long way, and soon he was making money, lots of it. He bought an apartment at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and a two-door home in Scarsdale. He wore flashy clothes and was very active in New York City nightlife. In California, he was welcomed in the highest circles, having been known to associate with famous actors of the time, such as Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, George Raft, Clark Gable, as well as with studio executives such as Louis B. Mayer and Jack Warner, one of the founders of Warner Brothers Studios. He also maintained relationships with high-ranking politicians, businessmen, attorneys, accountants, and lobbyists. He spent time in Las Vegas as well, and in 1946 decided to get into the hospitality business, as ironic as that is, so he bought controlling interest in a little-known hotel called the Flamingo. Later, under threat of death, the owner William Wilkerson eventually sold all of his stake to Bugsy and went into hiding in Paris. By 1947, Bugsy had poured over $6 million into the project. In today's money, that's over $60 million. On the night of June 20th, 1947, as Siegel sat with his associate Alan Smiley in Virginia Hills' Beverly Hills home, reading the Los Angeles Times, an assailant fired at him through the window with a .30 caliber military M1 carbine, hitting him many times, including twice in the head. No one was charged with the murder, and the crime remains officially unsolved. In the Bailey Stoker Synagogue on New York's Lower East Side, Siegel is memorized by a plaque that marks his death date. Siegel's plaque is below Max Siegel, his father, who died 2 months before. Number 2. Richard Kuklinski, more commonly known as the Iceman. Ever hear of someone getting iced? Yep, he's why. This one's really just an effective serial killer, which caught the notice of the mob. It is thought that the 6'5", 300-pound monster is responsible for nearly 250 killings. He commonly shot, stabbed, bludgeoned, and strangled men to death, never women, for the tiniest of heirs. For him, murder soon became sport. When he found out the mob would pay him to do his little hobby full-time, he figured, why not? One day, Mayo, a mobster who worked with the Gambino crime family, decided to test out the Iceman by pulling over to the curb and selecting a random target, a man walking. He told Kuklinski to kill him. Without hesitation, Kuklinski got out of the car, walked up behind the man, shot him in the back of the head, and kept walking, never breaking stride. This made him DeMayo's favorite enforcer. Over the next 30 years, he took out innumerable targets. The lack of attention from law enforcement was partly due to his ever-changing methods. He used guns, knives, explosives, tire irons, fire, poison, asphyxiation, bare-handed beatings, which he said was, quote, just for exercise, unquote. When disposing of a body, his favorite methods included putting a body in a 55-gallon oil drum, putting a body in the trunk of a car and having it crushed in a junkyard, dismemberment, and burial. If he wanted to send a message, he was known to bring a person to the woods, tie him down, and let the rats eat the person alive. He would videotape these torturous murders as proof. Alternatively, he would tie someone to a chair, beat them, and then dismember them with power tools such as grinders and chainsaws. He said that as this always wrecked a perfectly nice suit and smelled awful after a few hours, he took this approach less and less. In the 1980s, after 25 years working as a hitman, he went into the business for himself. He burned his bridges with the mob, killing various Gambino members and former partners, and was soon arrested and convicted on 5 counts of murder. He died at the age of 70 on March 5, 2006, in a secure wing at the St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. A If you want to know more about this guy, there have been 3 documentaries, 2 biographies, a novel, and a feature film produced on Kuklinski based on his interviews and the results of the task force that brought the Iceman to justice. Number 1. Alexander Solonik, also known as the Super Killer. While Bugsy Siegel is responsible for the flashy, charismatic mobster image we know today, Alexander Solonik is responsible for the more modern, stone-faced, efficient, and impossible-to-catch hitman image. That ghostly, impersonal murderer which pops up in nearly every modern-day movie with a contract killer or hitman. Solonik trained with the Soviet Army, showing extreme aptitude for killing. He quickly worked his way up the ranks and was soon a member of the elite Militizia unit. After the military, he received training at Gorkievsky Institute. However, after only 6 months on the police force, he was expelled for extreme violence towards suspects. In 1987, he was charged with rape, and during a farewell meeting with his wife, before he was deported, Solonik escaped by jumping from the 2nd floor of the building. After several months, he was apprehended 120 miles north of the Kurgan and taken to prison. As he was a cop and the other inmates weren't exactly fond of the police, he was instantly marked for death. Solonik took on as many as 12 inmates at a time, earning him the respect of the fellow prisoners. After 2 years, he escaped. He went home and joined his local criminal organization, starting his long career as a contract killer. In 1992, he was given his first target, which stood no chance and was taken out quickly and efficiently. After that, he was sent to Moscow, and by 2008, he had become truly infamous in both the criminal underworld and among law enforcement. Eventually, law enforcement took special interest in Solonik and arrested him at a bar, but failed to do a proper weapons check, which, on a notorious killer, seems a ridiculous oversight. When they took him in for questioning, he pulled a fully automatic weapon from his raincoat, hitting 3 policemen. As he ran outside, he shot another 2 officers. One managed to shoot back and hit him in the kidney. He was eventually cornered, and although he managed to keep the police at bay for some time, he was overpowered. He was sent to a high-security prison in Moscow, where they removed the bullet. As he recovered, he studied foreign languages, and in 1995 he escaped from prison yet again. He moved to Greece, where he set up his own organization of over 50 men. They dealt primarily in narcotic shipments and contract killings, and were very successful, buying several villas in the Athens suburbs. He was supposedly found dead in 1997, 15 miles from Athens. The body was found strangled to death and had no identification marks or documents. Nevertheless, authorities identified him as Alexander Solonik. Well, that's it for this week's Top 10. So, do you think the body they found was really Alexander Solonik? Could someone have gotten close enough to strangle a man who held dozens of prisoners at bay, escaped prison twice, and was known as the Super Killer? Let us know what you think down below. If you want more Top 8 videos, please subscribe by clicking here. Top 8 Studios is on Facebook and Google+. Twitter is coming soon. Thanks for watching.